Hey guys, so while we are in the process, in this first unit, the goal is um, just to kind of go over some introductory stuff, get sort of situated as a writer and a researcher in this class, um, and also kind of wrap your head around what your topic might be for this inquiry project. Again, the goal is to be decided at the end of this unit, at which time you're sort of, stuck with the topic that you have. You can make some little tweaks, obviously, but if you're researching something about standardized testing and your research kind of goes in a different direction, you could tweak it like within that issue a little bit, but you couldn't switch from you don't want to switch from standardized testing to stem cell research because then you have to start the project all over again. And at that point, we're well underway. So really try to be thinking about what you might want to do. And again, like we've been making like some brainstorming lists of topics with Studio One. The goal is to cast a wide net and throw out a lot of different sources of reading and ideas and opinions and things to help get people started. So we're actually gonna kind of start here. You just did a little bit of work with kind of thinking about some of the places you go first when you are researching, whether it's for school or kind of on your own. Like, where are the places that you go first? And the most common one that I hear is Wikipedia. So we're going to be talking about that over the next couple of weeks and some of those kinds of sources and how we might use them. We're today going to start kind of talking about research at what I consider to be the very first step. One is when you go to your first set of Google results, which is typically where people go first. Like the internet, do a Google search, especially if you don't know anything about the issue, right? That's typically where we, do go first. And we end up at Wikipedia because it's the first that pops up. It's at the top of the list, So today we're going to be talking about the CRAP test, which is something we're going to use throughout this semester as a way to sort of critically evaluate sources that you're coming across, and also how to recognize what I consider to be sources that really shouldn't even be in the conversation. Like, there are a lot of sources. There's a huge spectrum of credibility for things that are going to be in your conversation. You are going to come across things that are super credible and things that are by scholars and things that are by journalists and things that are firsthand accounts and things that have bias, and they're all part of the conversation except for these sources. And that's kind of what we're going to start with. Okay, so the first thing is recognizing content farms, or really bad sources. So in order to do that, we're going to introduce the CRAP test, which is going to help you determine the level and type of crap you are reading. I'm going to make a lot of crap jokes. It's going to get awkward. Okay, so obviously it is an acronym because it sort of spells out, crap. Not to be confused with an initialism like UNC Charlotte, which doesn't actually spell out a word. Sorry, grammar nerd moment. So the first one is currency. So when you're looking at a source, you want to think about how current that source is. A common thing is to, for the page to pull up and look at it and, read through it and say, oh, this sounds interesting, and not pay attention to whether or not this was posted recently or whether this is part of the current conversation. So if you're going back to Burke's Parlor, thinking about whether or not this is from someone who is sitting at the table right now, talking and commenting on current issues, or are you, pulling up something that's old? Because it's kind of bad form to use something and throw out something that's outdated. You want to make sure that if you're talking about the issue now in the current conversation, that you're talking about and using sources that are relevant to right now. So you want to pay attention to when it is. So usually it's either at the top of the article where it has the author's name, or sometimes it's in the last revised or updated part that's at the bottom of the article, kind of in the footer. So just kind of paying attention to, if you're doing something that's a really popular, heavily debated topic right now, then your sources need to be super current. If it's something that like information is changing slowly, it's not as popular of a topic, then the current conversation might go back, 5 years. But it does kind of depend on your issue. So you really have to pay attention to how popular and covered and like how fast moving the information is. And you also kind of want to pay attention to like one things that you can kind of tell if something is really old, like just the page itself, is. And this last thing here, if you're looking at a web source, if you check the links, a lot of times if it's a source that like is older or nobody's using, the links won't be functional, or they'll be broken, or you go to a page and it'll say like error, and the link won't work anymore. So that can be another kind of easy way just to tell if something is not passing the crap test. Thing on the list is relevance, so R for relevance. So there's a couple of ways to think about relevance, like how relevant it is to your question. One thing is how in-depth and unique the information is. Something is not super relevant if it's rehashing old or superficial information. Another thing that you might want to think about is whether or not you are looking for something that is representing a particular like group or voice or perspective, or whether you're looking for a certain type of information, you're trying to answer a certain kind of question, and you want to make sure that the source is really not necessarily finding what you wanted to find, but definitely in terms of what it's offering, hitting the nail on the head. An example of something that's not relevant in this sense would be, you went looking up something for some historical context, and you found this article that's huge, but the only part that's relevant is this little bitty, small like subsection. That would be something that's not super relevant or super helpful. So you would want to scratch that and maybe move to something different, obviously paying attention to assignment requirements and that kind of stuff. The other thing is paying attention to whether or not it's referencing other sources, or if it's available elsewhere. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later. Like, for instance, the first essay that you read in your textbook by Megan Rand, she referenced several comedians. If you wanted to quote one of those comedians and you found that quote in Megan's article, you wouldn't want to quote it from Megan's article. Like, you wouldn't want to just find that quote and it's by her. You're not using anything else in Megan's article. You're just using this quote from that comedian. That wouldn't be the best source to use. You would want to go back and find that comedian's book or that comedian's source and use that, because that's the original place it was, and that's what's most relevant to what you're doing. So relevance goes in a lot of different directions, and it can be a little bit tricky. That's something we'll kind of practice with, Authority. I think we pay, oh, sorry, it's kind of jumping around a little bit there. Again, authority is something that goes in a lot of different directions also. Obviously paying attention to who the author or creator or the sponsor is. A lot of times, especially if you're on the internet, you can't always find who the author is of a text, but it's important not just who the name of the author is, it's also important who is behind it. So paying attention to not just this journalist, but what is the political slant of the paper that the news source that they're writing for, or what is the bias of the organization or company that's behind it. So paying attention to author and authority in kind of two different ways there, not just the writer itself, but who is in charge of that writer, and are there any biases there, and does that writer have biases? There should be an author. One of the biggest no's is if you cannot find an author or a publisher or any information about where that source was from. If you're wanting to use a source, and I say where, or someone else in class, if you're working with a group and they say well, where did you get this from, and you say, well, I don't know, that's a huge red flag. You should always be able to, it could have been written by Bob in his basement, and we don't even know who Bob is. You know what I mean? Because just about anybody can write stuff on the internet. So you really have to pay attention to make sure that you can find an author. That's step one. Then evaluating the author and the authority for that author, the news source or the site or the company. Paying attention to that author's specific credibility. If it's like Is it a personal stake that they have? Is it professional? Like, are they like a journalist or news, or this is their, related to their job? Or is it scholarly, in which case, like if they're saying they're an expert in this issue, like, and they're writing as an authority, what have they published? Where have they published? Can you find it? Where are they educated? Is their degree relevant? A lot of times you'll find like sources online, and if you actually read the author bio, it'll say like this person has they're writing about like video games and teens, and their degree is in English. They have a master's degree in English from such and such university. Awesome. What exactly does having a degree in English, like how does having a degree in English qualify you to write about that? I mean, it sounds nice, they have a degree, but it doesn't make them an expert in the thing that they're writing on. So that's a little bit sketchy, and you have to kind of watch out for that. Another thing is kind of paying attention to the domain. I bet a lot of you wrote that you were, in your notebook entry before this, you wrote that you were told to stay away from .com sites. There's a lot of different domains that house a lot of different kinds of sites. There's, the .com, the .edu, which houses like educational stuff. There's the .gov, which is like government websites, .org, organizations, nonprofits, that kind of stuff. You don't need to just stay away from .com sites. I'm going to give you an example. Like you might find news sources. News sources are also like often .com, right? A lot of your news and a lot of your interviews and a lot of your first-hand accounts and all that stuff are going to be .com. What you have to be careful about with .com is that it does in fact stand for commercial, so they're usually selling something. If you go, wish I could zoom out. Let me zoom out here. If you go to like CNN.com, so this is where I am, CNN. I'm gonna zoom out a little bit more so you can see the actual, now I guess you can actually see the site here. Maybe I can move it so you can see. There, CNN, there I am. Okay, so I'm on CNN, and you'll notice right at the top is an ad for a blender, because your margarita, it won't make itself. I mean, it won't. The struggle is real, right? You have to pay attention. Like even the stuff that you would typically consider like a source that you might use is also going to be selling things. That's how they support what they're doing and make money to keep themselves in business and all that kind of stuff. But it also makes it a very tricky platform, which is, something we will, talk about a little bit in just a few minutes. And also the other one that you kind of have to watch out for sometimes is, like the .org sites, because they can sometimes have some bias also, because that organization is typically going to give you information that supports what they're talking about. So you really sometimes have to pay attention and kind of verify things on those organization websites as well. So the second A is accuracy. And this is actually, I think this is super tricky. Especially with the way internet and news and everything is today. I think you know what I'm talking about. Really paying attention to how accurate and reliable the information is. So again, kind of paying attention to some easy ways that aren't as tricky to kind of notice with this is, are the sources listed? Can you find references? Can you easily, like if they are really citing like credible specific things, they're gonna want to showcase that and make it really easy for you to verify stuff. So if you notice it's really difficult to find the sources of information, then that's probably on purpose. That's a rhetorical choice. So you want to pay attention to, are the sources listed? Is there a references list or a bibliography? Can you tell where those sources are used? Like, are there links? Has this been reviewed by a panel? A lot of times, especially if you're on like medical sites and things like that, it'll say like it's fact check, or it'll say here is our review process, and you can actually look at like the panel that checks everything and verify them to make sure that information is correct. So sometimes you can also like do your own research and kind of look and like verify things from other sources. Another easy way is to pay attention to like grammar and spelling and that kind of stuff, like correct citations, because that does kind of like, I guess it really does like put a little bit of a hit, a little bit of a dent in their credibility. If they're not doing enough work to like check their grammar and their spelling. It makes me wonder what else they kind of skimmed on, you know what I'm saying? The last thing is purpose. So paying attention to the reason behind that source. Is it there to inform, to teach, to persuade, to sell, to entertain? Because sometimes I can tell you if there's bias. If it's there to inform, things that inform can still be biased, can still kind of have that slant, but maybe less if it's there like, or also to teach, less if it's there to sell you something for sure. Or to persuade you of something, if you can tell like what the goal, what the point is, and whether or not the author has that bias. Sometimes you can tell that the tone or language is biased. Like you can hear the slant, and you can hear sometimes like an overly emotional way of like going at an issue that reveals a bias. So you can tell if the point of view is objective or impartial, if they're actually talking about multiple perspectives or really just focusing on this side is right and this side is wrong without really weighing things fairly. If they're basing things more on facts or opinions. How free of advertising is the website? Typically, the fewer weight and preference that are given to ads, the more trustworthy it is. We'll talk about that a little more in just a minute.